A shocking new poll finds that more young Americans actually condone the assassination of the UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson than those who don't. And we're gonna get to the details of that poll in just a second. But there are also some pretty big updates in regard to the assassin himself, Luigi Mangione, and a New York grand jury has indicted him this afternoon. Mangione is charged with 1 count of first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism and 2 counts of second-degree murder, one of which is charged as killing as an act of terrorism. The terrorism label is interesting in this context. Maybe we'll talk about it in just a minute. But he's also charged with he's charged in the indictment in Manhattan Supreme Court with multiple counts of criminal possession of a weapon and a single count of criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree. And Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg added terrorism charges. They were warranted. He says that they were warranted because the slaying was intended to evoke terror. So if Mangione is convicted of these charges, obviously he would be given the maximum sentence and would likely spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mangione is currently being held in Pennsylvania, but New York Governor Kathy Hochul is expected to file an extradition request so Mangione can be tried in New York. Now, Bragg stated that he has indications Mangione will waive his right to an extradition hearing and consent to the move. I don't know why he thinks that, but that's what he thinks. So before we get to the shocking polling results on this issue, Cenk, thoughts on the charges?
Yeah. So first, quick comment from Super Chat as we're doing the show live. You know, the show's live 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern every day. Rage Rock for now says, I have an eerie feeling that if Mangione ever takes a stand in court, he'll have a terrifyingly articulate explanation for why he's not a criminal. In fact, that's going to lead into the poll we're going to tell you in a second, and why I said from day one, I don't think they'll let him testify. Even if he wants to testify, even if he's got every right to testify, my guess is that the government is at least going to try to stop him from exercising his constitutional rights and testifying, because they do not want to get his message out. So now the problem here is most of the killers in our world, almost all of them, have lunatic messages. There's something wrong with them, that's why they did the killing in the first place. Unfortunately, in this case, Luigi, his complaint is one that is shared by a lot of people. Again, that's gonna lead to the polling in a sec. So he might be right about his critique of the healthcare industry while being completely wrong about the way that he carried out that protest through murder. So in terms of what do I think of the charges, this is the most obvious charges of all time. Look, I don't care if you call it terrorist or not. He should get life in prison, period. It's a cold-blooded assassination, murder. It doesn't get any more clear murder than that. So if he's saying, look, I'm a hero, and I decided to spend the rest of my life in prison to make this point, okay, but that's what you're gonna get.
Right.
Like, I don't see any reason in the world why he should get anything less than a day off from the rest of his life being in prison.
So the terrorism element of it kind of bothers me because, first of all, it's making an assumption about what the real intentions were here, like beyond what Mangione himself stated in his manifesto, which was to evoke fear or terrorism or a sense of terror, I'm assuming with other corporate executives. But is it just because other corporate executives feel scared? Is that all it takes for?
I mean, when anyone is killed in cold blood, we're all get a little bit more afraid. So I suppose you could call that terrorism. So look, in my experience, I don't know about this in particular because I'm not sure about New York law and if something he did triggers a technical legal definition. But did they want to call him a terrorist? Very likely they did. And in my experience, the overall point is that whenever the government doesn't want any message getting out, they call the carrier of that message a terrorist. So if somebody, and the point is not that he didn't do violence or those people didn't. It's that when someone else does violence, but the government is not as upset about their message, they don't get called a terrorist.
Yeah, I think that's why this bothers me so much, right? Like the very selective use of specific terminology, especially from someone like Alvin Bragg, right? Like when you read about the stories of certain violent crimes and even murders and dismemberments that have taken place in New York in recent years but haven't been prosecuted to the same extent that this is being prosecuted, it makes you wonder. But I do want to also talk a little bit about some fascinating polling results, because today the New York City Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch said this of the reaction to the murder of Brian Thompson. Quote, "This was a senseless act of violence. It was a cold and calculated crime that stole a life and put New Yorkers at risk. We don't celebrate murders and we don't lionize the killing of anyone." But as we mentioned earlier, a lot of young Americans specifically have not only celebrated this, they do condone the assassination of Brian Thompson. So here's some data from Emerson College. They're the ones who did the poll. They found that 41% of voters ages 18 through 29 find the killer's actions acceptable. 24% say somewhat acceptable and 17% say completely acceptable, while only 40% find them unacceptable. As for Americans overall, the results are different. Okay, so a majority of voters, 68%, think the actions of the killer of the UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson are unacceptable. 17% find the actions acceptable, while 16% are unsure. So take a look at this graph, final data point that I'll show you. So 40% of Americans between the ages of 18 to 29 think Mangione's actions are unacceptable. 56% of voters ages 30 to 39 think unacceptable. 69% of voters ages 40 to 49 think that Mangione's actions are unacceptable. So you guys get the picture. The older the individual responding to the poll, the more likely they are to find the assassination unacceptable.
Yeah, so first let's talk about how startling this is for most folks, and then let's talk about why. So when you see those numbers and you see that even of the 40% that found it unacceptable among the young, even 7% of them said only somewhat unacceptable. 19% said, well, I'm not sure, could be acceptable, could not be acceptable. So that only leaves 33%, 1/3 of young voters in this country who think that it was totally unacceptable to kill an executive. That is amazing, okay? So I've never seen a poll like that in my life. Now, having said that, I'm not overly surprised by it. And why am I not surprised by it? Because young people in this country are furious with corporate rule. And so this is a very unhealthy way to show that, obviously. But when you see young people celebrating the assassination of a corporate leader, it's not random. They didn't see one video on TikTok. No, it's a cultural phenomenon where young people are not getting their news from television, not even close. They haven't watched cable ever in their lives. And so they've never been the victims of mainstream media propaganda where they tell you, no, the status quo is great and you should accept your fate. And no, if you don't pay the ransom, health insurance companies are allowed to kill you. If you don't pay the ransom, the drug companies are allowed to charge you anything they want. And if you don't pay it, then again, you can go ahead and die. You can go ahead and die in 18 different ways. You're not gonna ever be able to buy a home. You're not gonna be able to afford college or any hope for the future. And then you wonder why they have a reaction like this. They have a reaction like this because they're furious at corporate rule.
Yeah, and look, I find murder to be wrong, period. I don't think that that is a solution to the systemic issues that are infuriating Americans. By the way, across the political spectrum, this is not a right or left issue. You see the celebratory nature of some of these posts on social media coming from people on the left, people on the right. And I don't think that this is a good solution, but at the same time, it's really up to our elected lawmakers to understand that you can't finger wag your way into a society that would condemn it entirely, right? Like, you could go ahead and shame the people who reacted to this poll the way that they did. That's only gonna make them more angry. There's something broken in our country, right? There's a lack of hope among young people, and I don't blame them for feeling that way. So we need to find real solutions. We need to improve people's lives. People need to have hope. That's really the only way to change things. But I look at our current political landscape, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. So the finger wagging will continue.
And the revolution will continue, and now unfortunately in unhealthy ways. So the healthy way to do a revolution is to do a political one and to get money out of politics and end the corruption so that we end corporate rule. But they're giving, our current politicians are so corrupt, and so is our current mainstream media, that they give no space for that to happen. So it comes out in unhealthy ways. Yep. Finally, Bernie and Warren, Elizabeth Warren came out and said, look, it's the same exact thing we're saying. The murder is reprehensible. There's no excuse for it. But let's look at the root causes as to why people are having this reaction. And of course, Biden advisors then went all over television and were like, no, we demand to be dumb. And we don't want to discuss the root causes. We don't want to discuss anything. And they blame Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren for having an intelligent conversation about it. Why? They say, no, right after the death of this person is not the time to talk about what's wrong with health insurance. And then if you ask them, okay, then what's the right time? They'll never give you an answer.
Right.
They don't want to talk about it right now because the whole country's talking about it. So they're like, shush, those are our donors. What are you doing, Bernie and Warren?
Yeah.
You can't hurt our beloved donors. Everybody shut up about health insurance. Those are the guys who pay our bills. And that's why we hate establishment politicians.
Yeah, the best time to have talked about reforming our healthcare system might have been, during the presidential election we had, where healthcare wasn't mentioned really at all, with the exception of the one debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, where Trump said that he has concepts of a plan. That was it.
And what was Kamala Harris's plan?
No
what
plan.
was Democratic leadership plan, right?
No plan.
So before she said Medicare for all, when she was obviously lying and trying to get votes in the 2020 primary, and if you don't think she was lying, then you are just a total naive fool. I'm sorry, but really wake up from the propaganda that you're watching. Of course she was lying. She never meant Medicare for all. None of them meant it, other than the progressives. So then you say, okay, well, I mean, Jesus Christ, at least a public option. So there's a way that you save someone's life, right?
Right.
If they want insurance from the government, they can still get private insurance. The reason she didn't mention that super weak sauce option is again, she took $774,000 from the health insurance industry in this campaign. So she's literally paid not to have that position. I'm sorry if you're a Democrat and that breaks your heart, that's how this works. And then secondly, Joe Biden said he would do the public option, lied, never even proposed it. So that was embarrassing, so that's why they didn't want to mention it. Here's an idea for Democrats who'd like to win. Maybe actually try to do the things that you said you'd do instead of lying about it 24/7.